the goal is to expose this audience to generative AI-powered methods, tools, and techniques to help overcome challenges with active learning instruction. And we will provide you with take-home materials. These will be made available in a few days from now, sometime next week. I will simply send out an email to everyone with the email you registered, with a zip file that you can download, extract, and get materials. And as I've mentioned already, there's a follow-up option in the feedback form as well. Now, just to get everyone on the same page. So obviously, you know, currently AI is a huge buzzword, and different people mean different things when they say AI. In this particular context of this workshop, if I use the word AI or generative AI, I mean the general purpose large language model based generative applications like ChatGPT, like Claude, Gemini, and so on and so forth. So that's what we mean there. And again, the idea that you can generate content based on prompts trained on web sources, ChatGPT being the use leader. I think maybe Claude now is making more money, but ChatGPT has more users. So it's ChatGPT and Claude are kind of leading the pack. So when we say AI or generative AI, that's what we mean in the context of this workshop. And as I've mentioned before, active learning, where students engage with real world problems and scenarios and situations, and have discourse with their fellow students and present their work and reflect on their work, all that good stuff that we want in active learning, is challenging. It's more challenging than the traditional lecture recitation exam model. And for that reason, a lot of times it's not implemented. And as you can see here, there's a list of challenges with active learning that have been recognized. And it is my belief, and I believe the belief of my colleagues as well, that generative AI, to an extent, when built on top of rigorous and research-based pedagogy, can help reduce or tackle or address some of these challenges. So that's what we're hoping to show you today, that there is a way to help you to actually do active learning instruction with generative AI that helps towards some of these challenges. And finally, just a bit of a plug. This is a paper that I published together with Dr. Otto and Professor Bertel, who are both here and will be actually giving the next talk. And this is just, it's very suitable for this particular workshop, because we actually did a literature review of how generative AI is used in STEM education, from high school all the way up to graduate education. And what you can see on the left are the different skills that the generative AI was used to teach. And on the right, you can see those skills versus the roles that the generative AI played in the interaction with the students. And again, this is just to give a bit of a context, because actually all 4 activities are going to pertain to one or more of these skills that are on the left, and one or more of these roles that are on the right, even if not explicitly.
Thank you, Rhea. My name is Jason Morphew. I'm an assistant professor of engineering education here at Purdue University. I'm also an AI teaching fellow at Purdue. And what that entailed is we got to spend a week in the summer learning about a whole bunch of tools that I had not known about, because as generative AI progresses, the number of tools that are out there has just exploded. And so just being able to keep track of everything has been a problem, right? And so I think Senay and I have two interesting tools that may be useful. If for those of us that don't want to delve down and get into the code and develop AI and large language models from scratch, how can we harness the power of a large language model but constrain some of the features we don't want? And so I want to just quickly introduce you to a off-the-shelf RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation. What that does is it's acts kind of like a filter that sits on top of a large language model. So the large language model can speak and use language as it was trained. However, the content in which it draws from is being constrained by whatever you upload. And so I'm going to show you just really quickly a product from Google. There's other products from other companies that do the same thing, but I particularly like NotebookLM. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And in the chat, I have the link to NotebookLM I just posted there. And so this is what it looks like when you go in there. And if you click on Try NotebookLM, it'll take you to a sign here. I happen to have recent notebooks because I do use this to teach in class. And so in my graduate courses, I teach the students that this is a really great place to load very difficult readings to help you kind of think through and work through some of these readings that are maybe extra challenging for students. The way that it works, I'm going to go ahead and just click on one that I've uploaded my work to, is we can upload all of our sources here, and that's the knowledge base it draws from. Now, in the terms and conditions for NotebookLM, they claim, and I believe it, that they do not upload anything you put in this NotebookLM. They don't upload it and train the network with it. And so some of those concerns about copyright and intellectual property, I think are maybe mitigated through that purposes. And so it doesn't actually upload this to train the LLM. It just uses this as a filter, which the LLM goes through. And so once you upload these things, it could be PDFs, it could be Word files, it could be links to a Google Doc, it could be links to a YouTube site. You can also then search the web for other resources, and it'll find other resources for you, and then you can create that filter. But then you have a whole bunch of choices. And so you can have audio overviews. So you can create a podcast of people discussing these works. You can create videos, a 15-minute video explaining the concept or the topic. You can create mind maps. You can create quizzes and flashcards and infographics. It does a pretty good job. It does reports where you can create study guides. You can do that type of stuff. But then also you can prompt inside here to constrain it even more. So we teach the grad students to use this as kind of a tutor as we're going through difficult readings. The other things you can do with this is you can go ahead and click share, and you can create an interactive chat bot, and you can have it so that the students can only interact with the chat. They don't actually see the sources you upload. And so what I'm doing with my undergrad students right now is I have loaded up a whole bunch of information that a client would have, and I'm creating virtual clients for students engaged in engineering design. And so they chat with it as if that was one of the clients, and it allows them to get kind of that immediate feedback on how accurate they are at asking questions and stuff like that. And so I just wanted to share that with you. There'll be a folder that's accessible that'll have all the details and all the links for you put up. I just kind of wanted to share this because I think this is a really amazing tool for people that want to use large language models but don't want those hallucinations, don't want it to go beyond the scope. The other great thing about this is if you ask it a question that's not in its knowledge base, it will say, I don't know. It won't try and make up an answer. And so that's why I really love this. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to turn the rest of the time over to Senay, because I think what she is going to have you walk through is going to be extremely valuable, and it's going to require maybe a little bit more facilitation than just using the NotebookLM. So I'll turn it over to Senay.
Thank you, Jason. And while I am transitioning, please share your questions with Jason. Any comments? All right.
Yes, people are very positive about Notebook, those who are familiar with it.
Mhm.
And someone even said, I wasn't aware of the chat option. So that's good. People are learning new things. Thank you so much, Jason.
Mhm.
And I will say I also use NotebookLLM. I think it's very, very useful.
Wonderful. So I will just jump in and talk more about Claude with a little bit of help from ChatGPT. So typically we see the use of these large language models as assistive tools. And these are when we talk about complain about cheating, plagiarism, that is like happening in that assistive tool space. There is also on the other side where these tools can create agents, so can automate processes. So with that one, there's also high risk and high benefit. What I would like us to focus on is in the middle, where AI is used as a design tool, and in Sofie's terms, maybe it is simulator, using it as a simulation tool. So I will focus on and give an example of that, how we can use AI, particularly Claude, as a design tool. So, as you know, active learning is something we want to promote. And here I wrote down in my own words what I want to create. I want to create a user interface that takes traditional textbook problems and then turns them into authentic, real engineering problems. And I want these context to be appealing to undergraduate students. I also want the new problem, to require the same calculations that the original problem included. I also don't want it, I realized it was making too dramatic situations, life and death. So I wanted, no, not too much drama, not too much stress on the students. And then eventually it will ask for students to make a decision. I also included an instructor guide with student sample answer, as well as a set of learning objectives and a grading scoring guide. Finally, I included a label to make sure that the purpose and precautions are clear. So I use Claude for it, and the apps and website link, when you go to Claude, you will see that option. So I had that prompt. However, before using that prompt, I went to ChatGPT and to improve that prompt. Let me go to that. So I will go through it. Basically, I have my initial wording, then I go to ChatGPT, improve that prompt. And once I'm happy with the output here you are seeing in the designing, I can eventually, once I'm happy, I can publish it and it will generate a URL that I can share. So another piece, you will see that it won't work the first time, so you will need to have some debugging. I added a prompt that will explain what the problem is, typically an API request problem. So that helped me to debug. Again, this debugging process is also prompt-based. I'm using just natural language. So here are two examples. The first one, Problem Forge, is the version I created. The first one, I used the free version of Claude. Then I was so excited about it. And then next time I used the $20 paid version of Claude that I have on the right. I always include a product label when I create these kind of apps to make sure that it is citable, but also any warnings are clarified. In terms of this tool, it is really important for the instructor to check the technical accuracy. Does the do the values make sense? Does the context make sense? So I do also document and edit my process. I use Word, start with my initial prompt, what I wanted, and then this is after ChatGPT improved the prompt. From here, I further edit, and I edit the debugging panel before putting into Claude as a prompt. So I'm going to take us through this tool, share the link, and maybe Jason will share the link. But look at it, use it. But the goal of it is not necessarily you using my tool, but really taking this as an idea and create your own app and tool that meets your needs.
Senay, do you want to take questions now or at the end of the activity or at the end of the entire workshop? Up to you.
So I can take a few questions now. I will also share my screen if any questions come up.
So I've not seen questions, but I have a couple. Really interesting. So the first thing, I was just wondering, why did you use ChatGPT to improve the prompt and not just stay within Claude? Because Claude is also, right, like ChatGPT. So is there a reason why you went to ChatGPT specifically?
Excellent question. Yes, so Claude tries to create the app instead of improving the prompt, and ChatGPT assumes that I'm asking to improve the prompt. So optimizes for LLM.
And one more question is, because obviously, as you've said, this wasn't a case of you writing the full prompt and then everything just works. There was a debugging, there was a back and forth. What was the one or two key challenges or, on the way to perfecting it? Like what was actually difficult or not working? Because I'm assuming a lot of things did work right away, right? But some things maybe not so much. So what was sort of the challenge?
Yeah, typically API was the challenge. And then when I was using with the free version, I will run out of tokens. So I will need to wait until noon to go back to it. But typically with a few prompts, asking, to that this button didn't work, basically I didn't go back to the code to improve, but it worked. The other thing is this version is working pretty well, but sometimes when I was demoing earlier versions, it wouldn't work after I got the link.
So that's why you added the debugging panel to help with trying to figure out if things do go wrong, what is it that went wrong, I guess.
And then I can copy paste that as part of my debugging.
I've never heard that before. That's very, very useful. The idea of a debugging panel. So Senay, we have until 11, the 20 more minutes. What would you like participants specifically to do with the link that you provided them with? Because they have a bit of time. And do you want them to spend the full 20 minutes, or do you want them to come back a few minutes before and share a few things? Or
yes, so I would like them to use the link and see what they say. It takes a little bit of time to run. So what I'm sharing, I'm not sharing. Hold on. What I want to share is screen 2. Excuse me, let me find the right screen. Okay, so here, what you are seeing on the screen is my Claude chatbot here, where for this one, and then on the right side, it demos. And here, I can publish the artifact or download it. So this is like my workspace. And here you see the app that through the link that you are seeing this, but here I selected, you can type your own problem here. I can even write 2x plus 20. So I can type any problem and let's say health and witness, transform. But you can also select from sample problems and these context and transform the problem. And it will create a problem scenario that we need to check if it makes sense. It will, the key with the problem scenario is that it needs to ask for human decision making. So there needs to be a decision that the student is making plus the calculations. So in this case, they are deciding what would you recommend the team to investigate first. I also wanted the engineering principles to be spelled out by the student. I want students to clarify the assumptions they followed, but also since they are making a decision, I want the students to talk about the consequences of implementing that decision. So
Senay, you would like the participants to sort of try this out with a textbook problem that they might give the students. And maybe just to quickly answer Korea's question, if an instructor is used to writing contextual problems, wouldn't it be faster just go ahead and write it without using AI? What is the advantage? And allow me maybe to answer, Senay, and let me know if this is the correct answer. The idea here is that it's not that you are coming up with it from scratch, rather that there are existing textbook problems that you would use or that are easily accessible. And you can use this tool to more quickly and also give you some more ideas, turn it into a problem that's phrased in an authentic way. Is that right?
Correct. Correct. And I know there's a lot of textbook problems in the world with numeric calculations expected from the students. And we know that they can put it in ChatGPT, any of the chat boxes, it will solve, simulate it, and do cool things. What I would like to spread to the world is more of these authentic problems where students are still doing the technical calculations in the background, but eventually making a human judgment decision. So there was a question about who owns it. For the purpose of it, that's why I always create a product tag, a citable, like who created. I created it with using Claude. That is how I see it. But what I want to really emphasize here is moving from using AI as an assistive tool into this design space where we identify this is a pain point. We want like authentic problems, and they are not easy to write. So I wanted an application that will help make that process easier. Still, the context may not make sense. It may be, and I was talking with colleagues. I'm going to create a K-12 version of it with more, context, different contexts. And my takeaway, I'm hoping that you will take away from this. Okay, so I have this idea. I want to create an app. One thing I haven't shared it, I also created simulations. You can easily create simulations. I created a simulation of a swimmer with my children. It was like the numbers didn't make sense, but you can create a simulation quite easily. And there are, I think, some learning opportunities in troubleshooting or trying to understand what's wrong with this simulation. I'm curious, did the link work for everyone, whether you have Claude or not?
No, I had to create an account.
Yeah,
But I do have a question for you here, Senay, about there's a option to do choose a sample problem. So I just chose one of their prompts at the beginning. And then it asked to do a real world context, but I'm working on one of their examples, like the circuits problem here. And I don't see any of the contexts that really apply to that. They talk about campus life, transportation, consumer tech. And so if you don't think your prompt fits into one of those contexts, what is the, I guess, purpose of that context field? And I don't see any that really closely relate to like engineering fields or something if you're going to do, or a classroom problem for another type of science or math. Or so what's your experience with those real world contexts within this Claude?
So the top part input is about the technical content, which is circuits. I selected circuits, and then it uses that technical content in any of these different contexts. So it will actually create a problem where they need to this is Ohm's law. They will use Kirchhoff law of Ohm's law in a problem that is contextualized in campus life. So it won't be this real world context is basically topics that are relevant to undergraduate students. So this is still trying to create it. This is the earlier, okay. So I believe this is created. You're a student intern at a campus nonprofit that manages electrical system. So this is, the context is now campus life. So that is the context. We are an intern on a campus nonprofit. So if we selected health and wellness, it will look similar, but it will put maybe you are creating a
all right, so think I understand here. So the context is really generating a story within that environment of using the circuit in some type of scenario for that context is what it's generating that problem statement for.
And Senay, supposedly, if somebody were to edit the prompt for the app, they could add a new category.
Actually, does anyone
Potentially.
want to change it? We can, if you write it in the chat, I can put it here and see, we can see how it will change. If anyone has a prompt to add.
So adding another category to campus life, transportation, consumer tech, like adding a seventh category is possible.
So if anyone writes a prompt there, I can copy and paste. Okay, now it is health and wellness, the same problem calculation. So they are building a smart hydration station. So the context changed to health and wellness. So do you want to add another, maybe add more context? Context example. Tone, real word.
I guess you could add maybe infrastructure, like energy, water, sanitation. Just one example of context, I guess you could add here. Energy infrastructure, maybe.
Okay.
And Kenneth here has a question, Senay, about how to evaluate the work of students, which is, of course, a much bigger question than just this. We're using AI to create the assignments. What about the students potentially using AI to answer them, and so on? Of course, this is a bigger question than just what you are showing here.
Okay.
But actually, my talk touches on that a little bit, just to let you know, Kenneth.
So great question. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. First thing is I ask, again, these are all AI generated learning objectives, as well as the 3-level grading rubric that focus on the engineering, basically calculations, reasoning, and consequences of the, if we use the recommendation. And underneath, I included a sample student response. This is basically excelling. It looks very, not very, very high tech. So that is something I may work on, and you can probably have different levels. And then asked, so here, this text is evaluated by using the rubric at the bottom. So this is a sample student response. I mean, it is not very representative, but it is, I made it to create excelling. Regarding the question, yes, student can copy and paste this in chatbot. And it is, I don't think it's possible to create a problem, especially in introductory courses that I'm thinking for this material. However, the way I approach it is by making sure the problem includes a decision task where student needs to make sense of the numbers, calculations, and make a recommendation or a decision. I want to bring more of the human into the problems we are asking them, rather than, if you look at the original problem, where's what? Original problem, it is here. This is basically treating students as calculators. Calculate this, and the meaning is not really, the output is not really reasoned with. So the main goal of this problem transformation process is really putting students in that decision-making process. I know it is not necessarily like foolproof solution, but that is the vision that I would like us to move forward beyond textbook problems.
And Joe Diaz here is a good tip. For any of you, for some reason, the link doesn't work, you can copy and paste it into an incognito or a private browser window. Because it might be some issues with your browser cache or whatever, particular reason. But if you put in a private window, it should work. So yeah, we have a few more minutes left. Senay, if you can just go through and see if you have any.
Okay, Andrea, your items are added here now. So we have energy system, water infrastructure, and
Oh, excellent. So that's very easy, and it even adds a nice icon to each one. And I will just comment very briefly. A lot of these issues we are talking about, of course, existed pre-generative AI. If we're talking about students getting answers from Wikipedia or from Google or from a classmate who's done more work than they have. And there's not always easy solutions. If we could give an oral examinations on everything to everyone in the room with the student, that would probably be a perfect way of getting around all these problems. But obviously, logistically, in terms of cost, and so on, it's not possible to do. But one of the ways of doing it is trying to provide a learning process that enables students to think and not just come up with answers, and encourages them to do so. And I think this is one of the good ways of doing it, because as Senay explained, we're no longer asking them to just apply a formula or apply an equation, which is of course very repetitive, and doesn't relate in any way to anything they're familiar with necessarily. It's very abstract and detached from the real world. And this idea of authentic problems forces them to think about the context, but hopefully also we can choose context that is more familiar or more interesting to them, that they can engage with a little bit more, like campus life, for example. Make the question about the cafeteria that they eat in every single day, right? Or something like that. But yeah, there's clearly no silver bullets, no perfect solutions.
What I would like our group here is, if you would put it in the chat, what is a pain point you have? Like, what's the challenge we have? In my challenge was we have lots of traditional problems. Can we generate authentic problems while keeping the technical rigor of the original problem? And then if we define what pain points are, and then how can we create an app, web interface, a simulation to help with that? So, and from there, we try to tackle that pain point. So I will leave it there. I know it is 11 right now, my time, and I will do my best to read the comments as well.
Okay, everybody. Thank you so much. And I'm Jason. We have a 15-minute break. For those who want to take a break, feel free to do so. I will stay here. Senay, I don't know if you want, you can keep going through these questions, up to you. Or we can wait for the end. We might have a few minutes. We won't have that much time, but we will have a bit of time. And I see that Michelle here has some very interesting experiment that she did. I don't know, maybe you want to read through that, Senay, and see what you think.
Yep. And Rhea, if there's a couple comments in the chat that talked about wanting to know if we're going to need to install or sign up for something.
Go ahead, Jason.
If there's something else, it'd be great to know before the break, because it sounds like it's going to take a couple minutes, depending on where people are in the world, to be able to get access to some of these tools. So,
yeah, if there's anything to do with just troubleshooting and how to use it and so on, please go ahead.
Yep. But it looks like we might need access to ChatGPT after the break. And is there any other thing, Rhea, that people will need access to?
No, just ChatGPT.
Okay, so that would be something. If you don't have access to ChatGPT, you might want to see what you need to do to get access. Again, it may require a free registration if that's something that if you're willing to do.
Yes, and if you don't have access, please let me know. I will make sure to tailor my talk accordingly.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason.
Senay, I have a question for you. As you're using Claude and you had I'm going to call it a code window or something on the left-hand side, I don't see how to engage with that development window that you had. And when I hit the customize, that was going into some other things. Maybe that's where you were at, but I didn't have the full app set up. I'm using it on the web, so maybe there's something a little bit different.
Yeah, that's for you, Senay, I think.
Is
Oops.
Dr. Purzer still there?
Yeah. I click on at the end, it will have a download link. When I click it, it previews on the right. But sometimes I think depending on whether you go directly in the chat versus you go create app, that sometimes look different. Maybe we can troubleshoot later or.
Can I add something, Dr. Purzer? So I think what you shared was your app, right? So we're just seeing it from the user perspective, not the coder or the creator.
So I shared both of them. I think what you are saying, so this is the Claude here, and this is my chat box, and this I can review here, right? I'm guessing you can see this review.
Yeah, I
And
don't
then
see
I can see the HTML.
I don't see any of the Claude, the left half of your screen. I don't get that, so I'm
Brandon,
generating
try hitting customize on the top right, and then you're allowed to change the artifact.
Yeah, I'll have to play with it some
Yeah.
more, because when I hit the customize, then it comes up with here's a few ideas, and it wants you to create some prompts and then move on. So maybe I need to do that before I get a window on the left to manipulate things more.
I believe it is possible in Claude to also share your project. I think that, I'm not sure if that's what it's called, but meaning, you know, all the conversations and code and so on. So you can build on someone else's work rather than just the app. I believe that's possible. I've never actually done that in Claude, but I believe it's possible. Someone please confirm or correct me if I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, you go instead of chat, you go and create projects. Sorry, not projects.
Yeah, and someone is saying here that you might have to have a paid account to do that specifically,
okay.
which I think makes sense. So anybody can use the apps that you're creating. They don't need a paid account. They just need to have an account. But in order to actually modify or create your own, you would need to pay Claude. Have a subscription.
That's not true. I used it last week, free,
Oh, okay.
just to create one app. I was just practicing.
Oh, awesome. So yeah, so you don't need that. So can you also share your project with other people to work on?
Yes, I believe so. You can create
Oh,
the link.
excellent.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Thank you for correcting me. That's good.
Yes, sir. I just used Cloud like last week for the
So-
first time.
I created something in Claude too, but I didn't realize that I do pay, so I didn't realize that it was free.
I will say Anthropic right now is currently reevaluating what features are available at each tier, so it may change
Sure.
here in the near future as well. So
Mhm.
that's something that
Yeah, and I've started getting advertisements in my paid ChatGPT. So yeah, it changes all the time, of course. There's open source models that are coming out,
Yeah.
which I think many of us will have to start learning how to use soon.
And I think I want to highlight what Joe shared. If you want to go into the coding, go through Claude Code. This is code-free version. But what I recommend is start with your prompt, create a interface that like start by prompting to create an interface, and then you create whatever you want to do and then see what it will create. So any topic. So again, I said create a simulation that does X. So first, that will give you a sense of, oh, what can be created here. And then sort of you can play with that and then move into more sort of iterative, more planned design process.
Michelle McColgan, you have some very interesting idea here. When you say I tried it both ways, would you mind sharing with us?
Yeah, so I try to get students to create problems in class because they seem to be good at answering like just single problems. Like they don't recognize that a problem you can enter it in multiple ways based on parameters, right? They don't identify the same problem is just that you have a problem and you can ask a different question in it, but it's about the same problem. So in class, I try to get them to make their own problems, and they're so bad at it that it really showcases they don't understand, right? And so I was wondering if they could start, like I asked them to create a problem, and so like if they could start by, I'm going to create a problem, and I just picked something my student would have done, like for a ball launched at 45 degrees with respect to the ground, how far down the line will the ball go? Because there's missing things here, right? Like we're not talking about extraction. It's a way a student might ask a question when they don't know how to, when they're not like us and they're not like trained to create good questions. So, so it created, I first gave it a velocity, and then it gave me a completed problem, and it was really fast. And I feel like it's the kind of thing that students won't learn anything from unless they really were interested. But without the information, they are given like a parameter table, and so they're given a figure, and it's like a general problem where they can then go in and you could say, hey, start with this prompt, and then you could ask them to like look at the parameter table and pick something, and that way they're like seeing that all these things are linked and they're all really about the same problem. So that's what I was kind of interested in, to help them generate problems, because it changes how they think. I think it like moves them further up the Bloom's table, right? Or the Bloom's taxonomy.
So learning the topic by actually formulating problems
Right.
to explore
Yeah.
that topic. That's really interesting, yeah. And with Claude or generative AI, that's much easier to do than without that technology.
Right.
So that's an example of innovating in pedagogy with generative AI, which is rather than just replacing something, right, or saving time and so on. That's actually something new that I guess it was very hard to do before. That's a really very
It's
interesting
impossible.
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting idea.
Thanks.
So yeah, we have 5 more minutes for the break, but feel free to continue the conversation. And Joe Diaz brought up a really good idea, I think, for a future workshop, which is how to set up local AI systems, local models, open source. As I've said, I would gladly participate in such a workshop. Of course, everything has trade-offs. We do have to remember that. There's no perfect solution. But for the local context, we can maybe find an optimal one. Building GPTs in ChatGPT, how to create assignments, how to provide feedback to students. And this is very much a work in progress. This is something that I started doing under a year ago. I tried it out with students. Lykke and I, Professor Bertel and I, actually working on a paper somewhat related to this, more on the assessment side. But yeah, I just wanted to share with you how I do this and hear your opinions. So 10-15 minutes, I'll go over the background and I'll explain the activity. Then we'll have a 15-minute activity. And if there's time, we'll do a debrief. If I see that you need a bit more time for the activity, I'd rather give you more time for that. But that's basically the plan. So just a few points on background. So when we talk about assessment, we can divide assessment into 2 types. One is summative, or what we would usually call grades. So this is assessment of learning, supposedly or not, right? We can argue whether exams, for example, problem sets, and so on are the best ways of actually assessing learning, but formally that's what it is. And it has some stakes. The stakes may be low, the stakes may be high, but it has some stakes for the student. Whereas formative assessment generally has no stakes or very low stakes, and it's more about assessment for learning as the students are working through an assignment or a topic or a challenge. So it's more about feedback and helping to steer them in the right direction, or helping them think about different aspects of what they're working on. In the case of active learning, thinking, about the problem from different aspects or things of that nature. But it's not for giving them a grade. Therefore, it's not summative. And then I want to give you two criteria or aspects of assessment. And these are my names for them, kind of inspired by quality management, even though it's not exactly the same thing. But I find it very useful to separate these two criteria from each other and make them distinct. And also, when working with generative AI, it's even more useful. So one is what I call adherence, which is possibly the most common question that we get from students as they're working on an assignment or a project is, am I doing this right? Am I doing this in the way that you're expecting me to do it? So that is more about verification. That is more about adherence to the rules. And that's actually what we will focus on today, and I'll explain why in a bit. But then there is, of course, correctness, which is about validity. Am I doing the right thing? So if, just as a quick example, if I would ask a student, can you describe this system, this smartphone, as a system? Let's say, if we're talking about systems thinking. Or can you explain to me how this works electronically? Whatever you want to ask them about it. You are expecting a certain answer in terms of, okay, they need to mention the parts and the interactions, and they need to mention certain principles and so on. But there's also the actual correctness of their explanation. Is that actually how a phone works? So those are two different things. There's the rules that we expect them to follow and the framework that we expect them to follow with whatever it is we're teaching them. But it's also the actual correctness or validity of the content of their answer. So again, my suggestion is to make the two distinct, and it makes it a lot easier also to work with generative AI. So what is a GPT in ChatGPT? It's simply a personalized chatbot with its own instructions, its own behavior, and optional tools. So if you go to ChatGPT, and I do believe you need a paid version to do this, to actually create the GPTs, but you don't need it to use the GPTs. So your students don't need a paid version of ChatGPT in order to use a GPT. And the idea is that you can make a GPT that is a little bit like the NotebookLM that Jason showed you. It has its own information and its own instructions and its own source documents that it will refer to. And you can give it web access as well, but it will know, quote unquote, to refer to those source documents. So how do you go about creating a GPT in ChatGPT? You select whatever it is that you want to teach. In my case, I will show you an example to do with systems thinking, which is a higher order thinking skill, but it can be Newton's second law of motion, or it can be teaching them about how a coal power plant works, or anything that you can actually define. Concept, skill, method, tool, etc., whatever it is you want to teach. Then comes the really difficult part, is actually the most difficult part, is to actually formulate a construct for what it is that you want to teach. So if I say, I want to introduce systems thinking to first-year students at MIT, what do I mean by that? What do I mean by systems thinking? What is systems thinking in the introductory level? So I actually wrote a whole paper about that framework because I had to come up with a framework because I couldn't find one that was suitable for what I wanted to do. But this is actually the most important thing. And a lot of working with generative AI is really thinking through things and defining them in an explicit way. Things that were previously implicit or contextual and we all sort of, or tacit, and we all sort of understood them or assumed we understood them and never actually made them explicit. You have to go through the process of making them explicit, which is actually very helpful for a teacher, I think. And finally, you need to create a prompt for the generative AI. And as you saw with Senay's prompt to Claude, it's not a short one. It's easily a page, even a number of pages. Now, my suggestion is to create a prompt for the generative AI to give students feedback on adherence, not on correctness. Now, why is that? My argument is that generative AI can be relied on, not 100%, but to a very high level. And Lykke and I are currently working on feedback on adherence, which so far is showing, I think, very similar results to humans. So again, generative AI can be relied on for assessment where the guidelines are explicit, clear, and limited in scope. So if I have a definition of what I mean by introductory systems thinking, and I make it explicit, and that's what the generative AI is referring to, I don't have to worry about the generative AI going out to the internet and whatever the consensus is or whatever appears the most number of times, or some other weird calculation that it's doing to do with the correctness of what the students wrote. The correctness I leave to the subject matter experts, which are usually the instructors. I don't want to leave that for the generative AI. That's just my take on it. So this is why I'm suggesting, again, you select whatever it is you want to teach, you define it explicitly, and then you create a prompt for giving feedback on did they follow what you expected them to follow. And I will give you an example so you can see exactly what this looks like. And finally, you can create your GPT in chatgpt.com. So what is a feedback prompt made up of? Firstly, it has terms and definitions. So again, in my case, what do I mean by systems thinking? What are the different terms that I'm using? How do I define each one? Then what is the data analysis procedure? So I'm going to upload the responses from students, whatever assignment they did, whatever responses they had to a quiz, or whatever it was. I need to explain to the generative AI exactly, okay, you go row by row and you do this and you do that. Then I need to provide it with some kind of a feedback template. So this is what the GPT will actually tell students. This is how it will respond, how it will give feedback. And finally, I need to give it specific assessment guidelines. So you're looking at their system description. I want you to give them feedback on how they describe the structure, how they describe the behavior, how they describe the inputs, the outputs, the outcome, and so on. So again, everything is very formal and very explicit. And by the way, any of you who have ever created an assessment rubric, this is exactly what we do with an assessment rubric. It's actually no different. The only difference might be that we need to be, again, very explicit about everything. A human being might realize that you need to go row by row and start at the top. The generative AI will usually get this right as well, but it's better to be explicit about it. And that's where a lot of the work goes in. And this is how you actually create a GPT in ChatGPT. What's highlighted in yellow are the mandatory steps. The rest are optional. So what I'm showing you here is my actual, one of the GPTs that I've created for my own systems thinking framework, which is called SAFO, System Architecture Function Outcome. And the point of this GPT is to give feedback on whether the students are following the rules of the framework as they are describing systems, either existing systems that they're asked to describe or systems that don't exist, that they come up with as a solution to a problem. And the idea, again, is to give them feedback only on, did you follow the rules of the framework? So did you give a description of the structure? Did you give a description of the interactions? Blah, 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 blah. Not whether it was correct. They could be wrong about the parts and the interactions, but that's correctness. That's what I want to check. Now, what this helps me with is to save at least 50% of student questions, which are, am I doing this right? Because they can get immediate feedback. And again, it's limited only to the adherence. So I'm not worried about the validity or the correctness. That's for me to look at. And that makes for a much more interesting discussion with the students. Because it's not very interesting, did you follow the rules of the assignment, and making sure they follow the rules and that what they produce and deliver is something that is somewhat standardized so that you can look at different works by students and compare them. That makes our work a lot easier. But that discussion with the students is not particularly interesting because the framework that I came up with is not really the important thing. That's not the learning objective. The learning objective is to teach them systems thinking, help them improve their systems thinking and how to apply it to problems, how to apply it to generate solutions. So having this kind of GPT where I have the framework adherence, the rules explicit, the terms, the definitions, and so on, makes it very easy for me to now dedicate my time to the more interesting, deeper questions of correctness, of validity, of why did you make that choice? Why did you describe things this way, not that way? So again, you give title and description, you give it brief instructions on what it should be used for. Then you upload files under knowledge. So again, the construct, the thing that you're trying to teach, the concept, the method, the tool, whatever it is. The prompt that I described, the adherence feedback prompt. You can also add example assignments. If you've already created assignments around the same construct, then you can also upload examples, but this is not necessary. And finally, select appropriate capabilities. Do you want it to be able to do web search? Do you want it to be able to use Canvas, code interpreter, and so on and so forth? So here's an example of how I did it. I chose a concept that I call introductory systems thinking. I teach a first-year class at MIT. These are complete novices, and students at MIT choose their major at the end of their first year. So one of my students might end up being a biological engineer, and the other one might end up being a physicist, and the other one might end up being a computer scientist. I wanted to come up with a framework that I could use that is transdisciplinary across engineering, that I could use to teach students and engage them in systems thinking on an individual and a group basis through active learning, picking problems from their real life, and so on and so forth. So I came up with this concept and, with literature review and all of that, and there's a whole paper about it from 2023, whoever wants to read about that. And then, of course, I defined the concept. So I call it system architecture function outcome, and you will see soon the slide that kind of summarizes this construct. And finally, I created a prompt. As you can see, it says version 11, because this is a lot of iterations and back and forth and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And again, things that are completely obvious to us and we all sort of contextually, implicitly, tacitly understand, that doesn't work with the generative AI. So I'm not here to teach you about systems thinking, but just for you to engage with the chatbot, I will briefly explain. So the idea here is that, again, we are looking at systems, specifically artificial systems, or mostly artificial systems. So we're not looking at the human being, because the human being is a fully natural system. So that's the first thing, right? So this is a transdisciplinary framework, pedagogical framework mainly for engineering first year, novices. But of course, you can take it to higher levels as well, which I have. And now you have architecture, function, and outcome. So if we take the phone as an example, this is the system of interest, let's say. The architecture is the major parts, the essential parts of this thing. Systems thinking isn't about every single detail. It's more about trying to think of the major and relevant things. So the architecture of this system of interest is what parts is it made out of and how do they interact with each other. The function has to do with what are the inputs and outputs in order to make this thing function, because the phone on its own doesn't do anything. It needs our hands, right? Something to actually manipulate it. And sometimes it also needs input of power, right? For the battery and so on. So that's what the function is about. And finally, we have the outcome, which is why do we even care about all of this? Okay, we have smartphones and we can use smartphones. What need does it solve? What problem does it solve? And also detriments. What potential negative effects does it have? And on what people does it affect? So again, this particular construct, and I'm teaching first-year students, I'm trying to introduce them to systems thinking. So I'm trying to give them the things that I think are the most important to start with, but at the same time, not make it too simple. And again, you don't have to memorize this. This is just to show you what does the definition of a construct might look like. Now, for the generative AI prompt, I don't give these pretty icons and colors. I do everything as text. I don't use tables. I do use bullet points. And I sometimes also use numbered sections, but I very much suggest not using tables and not using diagrams. It's not yet at a point, from my experience, and I've tried different, not just ChatGPT, they're not yet at a point where their understanding of text is as good as their understanding of tables and images and so on, to the point of not getting things wrong. So again, just to show what this might look like, if we take a bicycle, this is an example of a diagram of an architecture of a bicycle. You can, of course, convert it to text this is what input and output looks like. So the human cyclist provides the input. The road or the lane where you are rolling the wheels on, that's the output. So this together shows you the system function of a bicycle. This is how a bicycle actually delivers its value. And finally, we have stakeholders. We have the problem that it solves for them. We have the benefits that it provides the stakeholders. And finally, it has potential negative effects. So this is what I actually ask students to do when I give them a system, or they choose a system, or they come up with a system that doesn't exist, they design a new one. They do all the work, they do all the research, they do all the thinking and the brainstorming, but then they need to actually present me with this diagram. And then and it will be a bit more complicated, there'll be more parts and interactions, but not a lot more. And the idea is that if they follow the rules of the framework, then it's so much easier for me to check their work, rather than getting back to them and say, oh, you left out the stakeholders, or you didn't connect all the parts in your architecture, and so on and so forth. Because again, there are rules to this, and I'm not going through everything here. It's all in the prompt. Okay, so this is the activity, and given the time, we only have 15 minutes, so I will ask you to just go through the activity. There is a form to submit, which you will go through the activity. So first, the link to the GPT and also to this presentation, the link is in the form. So don't worry about that. You'll have the link to the form. Everything is there. So first, pick a concept, and this is just individually on your own. Pick a concept or method or tool or technique, anything that you're already comfortable with teaching. So not something that you find challenging, just to make this exercise a bit easier, something you're already well-versed with teaching and that you're comfortable and confident about giving feedback to students about. Create a short description of the assignment through conversation with the GPT. And I gave you an example prompt. It's also in the form, and you can just copy and paste it. You don't have, for now, again, for purposes of this exercise, you can just copy and paste it. It will give you 3 ideas for assignments. And the idea is to teach whatever it is you want to teach through this systems thinking framework. So imagine you could create your own GPT based on a different framework of something else, right? But it's just to give you an example of how this can be used by an instructor to create an assignment. Now, we'll give you 3 ideas. In the form, you just need to put one of them, the one you like the most. And you can, of course, play around with it, change the phrasing. And then I want you to expand on a connection between the assignment and what you want to teach. So it will give you a short description, and maybe you like it, or maybe you change it a little bit, but then give a bit more explanation of how this will help teach the particular thing that you want to teach, the concept or the method and so on. And again, I gave an example prompt. The idea here is just to have a taste, really. I'm not expecting you to come out of this with a fully ready assignment. So this is the QR code. If you could please snap it, and I'll also put the link in the chat. 1 second, I will share my screen in a sec. I just want to put the link in the chat first. And again, if you could take the next 15 minutes just to go through this assignment, go through this activity and submit the form. And here is the QR code again, in case you prefer the QR code. The link to this presentation is right at the top of the form. And the link to the GPT is in the 3rd or 4th question, the first one that asks you to use it. And if you have any problems, please let me know. So I'm going to share my screen now and show you a quick example of how this works. Again, all the example prompts, all the links are in the form. Okay. So I'm in the Sappho application expert, as you can see at the top. And you are not able to see the documents and the instructions that I gave it. So the students will not be able to see any of that. So again, I put in the example prompt. Now let's say I want to teach Newton's second law of motion. The reason I'm giving that is because this is obviously well known. It's not something that's ambiguous. So it's kind of easy for an example. And I'm giving a description of the learner population. So I would say students in Boston, Massachusetts, in the 5th grade of school. let's say. And then the learning goal, I would say, for example, being able to apply Newton's second law of motion to a real world scenario. I want to teach this by having the learners carry out system description assignment in pairs based on the Safo framework. Okay, and I'm just going to hit that. And remember, I in the settings for this, I said web search is an option, right? So it goes out to the web essentially to get ideas. 10 to 29 words. Students analyze a playground slide system, okay? Pairs model a grocery cart system, learners examine a bicycle system. Okay, let's say grocery cart. I'm assuming they've all been to the supermarket at some point. I don't know if they all ride bicycles. Playground, some of them might feel it's a little bit too childish. I don't know. Let's just go with 2. So in the example prompt I gave you, to expand, and again, you can absolutely use your own prompt. It's just for sake of time. I'm going to copy paste the description of the assignment here. And I'm going to put Newton's second law of motion here and see what it comes up with. Okay, now I've asked it in 20 words or more. You can change this. You can say 100 words if you want it to give you a much more detailed, a much fuller explanation. Now, the idea here, of course, is not that ChatGPT is going to replace your work in creating assignments. The idea is to give you ideas, is to help you brainstorm, help you engage with it. But this is all based on the fact that there is an underlying framework with a very clearly defined construct. So I could say, for example, give me an example of a system description in Safo in response to the above assignment I picked. So it's telling me this is the system of interest. This is the architecture. This is the function, inputs, outputs. This is the outcome. This is an example. And now I can say, give adherence feedback to your response. Now, it'll be interesting if ChatGPT, of course, this is not real. There's no actual need to do this. But you see, for example, this is what the students can receive. Now, the nice thing about this is it's not really taking away the learning per se, because using the framework for me is not that important. More important for me is the validity, the correctness of what they wrote. Right, and following the rules is just helps me to then check their answers. So again, this is the example. And if you could take the next 7 minutes or so to go through the form, come up with your own ideas. And if you have any questions, please leave them here in the chat. I'm going to go through them now. Yes, Jason's comment absolutely spot on. And again, there's so much to go into this about how to actually develop the eventual prompt. So again, the construct and the feedback prompt, but it all starts with what is it that I want to teach and how do I define that? So if I say introductory systems thinking, what do I actually mean by that? Okay, so the system of interest, architecture, function, outcome, what do these things mean? Which, you know, that's really the tough part. Alfred, very good question, and thank you. What design strategies help ensure GPT-based formative assessment gives pedagogically meaningful feedback rather than fluent but shallow responses? So Lykke and I actually working currently on a paper that discusses that. So in a very, very short answer, kind of repeating what I've said before, which is you have to define the construct first. Whatever the concept or method or tool or technique that you want to teach, there's a lot of tacit, implicit, contextual information that's not written down, that's sometimes not even discussed, sometimes we don't even think about because it seems so obvious to us. But it's obviously not obvious for the generative AI because it doesn't work the same way that we do. And you really have to make it explicit. And now you can test that with the generative AI because you can then stress test it against examples and see whether it got it, quote unquote, or didn't get it. So as you can see, the feedback prompt is version 11, and that's because it's not exactly the same one that Luke and I have been working on. It's similar, but it's because we actually tested it with real student samples and read through the feedback and saw where it got things completely wrong, where it got things right, and where it got things where, you know what, it's kind of a matter of opinion, which is fine. It's more about just weeding out the major comments that we had where it's wrong or misleading. So yeah, it's an iterative process, but it all starts with your construct. Separating adherence and correctness also allows for better integration. Of peer assessment. Luca, do you want to maybe expand on that a bit? That's an interesting point.
Yes, well, I think you already touched a little bit on it, that actually the reflections also on minor mistakes that a GPT might make is actually can sort of allow for the students to discuss also I wonder why it would give this response. And so actually have them assess the correctness or the feedback can also be part of the exercise. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I thought you meant a different thing, which I think is also true, that if we want students to assess each other's work or give feedback on each other's work, having the students go through all the adherence feedback makes it a lot easier because then everyone gets a similar format of work rather than what did you mean by this and what did you mean and where's this and where's that. They can get into the deeper, more interesting questions, right? Which is what I call the correctness, which can cover a lot of things, but it's about the actual understanding that we're interested in. Again, the framework is not the interesting thing here. The framework is just a way of introducing systems thinking to students. The interesting thing for me is the systems thinking, them demonstrating systems thinking. So we just have a few more minutes. If you could please take the time to finalize the form. I'll keep quiet for the next 3 minutes while you can do that. Please just do your best. Again, don't worry too much about, how perfect everything is. We'll meet back in 3 minutes for the final activity.
I'm going to be presenting the Teaching in the Age of AI, how to design your learning activities. If you're an educator or someone who's interested in learning and teaching in the age of AI that builds critical thinking or preserves critical thinking. So just briefly today, we're going to be talking about some background, why we need this, why we need to redesign our activities, and we're going to do the workshop. The redesigning activity is going to be an individual one, and in the last 10 minutes, we can do debrief, or if you have any questions, feel free to put on the chat or chime in. I will be more than happy to answer your questions. Just briefly talking about myself, I have a PhD in engineering management, systems engineering at the George Washington University, and I did my first postdoc at Harvard where I focused on engineering pedagogy, and I did my second postdoc at USC where I focus on user experience, human-computer interaction, and virtual reality. So if any of these interest you, feel free to stay in touch with me. Hopefully what you'll leave this workshop with is identifying assignments or any learning activities in your own teaching or in your learning actually vulnerable to cognitive erosion, which I'm going to be defining what that means in the next couple of slides. Redesigning your assignments. If you have any assignment in mind, you can take that with you and hopefully initiate how you can redesign that activity so that it can adapt to the age of AI, and integrating AI as a learning partner, not as a shortcut for thinking. Okay, so what is the problem? We talk a little bit about why students are using AI. But the most problem is that the cognitive erosion, let me, one second. Yes. The cognitive erosion actually is the biggest problem, right? Because we don't want our students to offload, to shortcuts their thinking to their to their AI use. We don't want them to lose their ability or opportunity about their skill development, like their cognitive processes, like reasoning, decision making, problem solving, critiquing an assumption, or reflection, metacognition. And the solution for this potential cognitive erosion due to AI use for students, or again, for your own learning, is teaching students, instead of banning it, instead of telling them do not use AI, instead of doing that, meeting them at where they are and teaching them how to effectively and responsibly team up with AI. So the solution in my teaching, in my pedagogical approach, is the redesigning learning activities that use AI to support critical thinking so we can prevent cognitive erosion. Okay, so just briefly, what is the problem, right? So the old way of doing it, we probably were old enough or young enough to experience that this old way of teaching or being taught. Our professors or our teachers in the past, in the pre-AI era, would ask us, okay, write this essay, summarize this article, solve this problem, analyze this problem or issue, right? But the problem is that learning is replaced by AI so easily when you ask students to do these activities, to engage with these cognitive activities. So how we can replace with a good pedagogy is that you can consider asking students, what assumptions am I missing here? Challenge my argument, challenge my implicit assumption, explicit assumption. What would an expert question here? What would an expert think in this situation? So in this new type of pedagogy, then the AI becomes a thinking, learning partner. And I call it an AI buddy in my own teaching. I teach several engineering courses with different pedagogical approaches, and in all my courses, I'm using AI in different ways, but I use AI as a thinking buddy. So my students reflect their learning process with AI, which I'll be explaining in the next couple of slides. So how do I approach designing my assignments, my learning activities in my own teaching that are available and appropriate with AI? So I have 4 steps that I would like to show you today. The first one is process. So students explain how they reached their answer, making their learning process visible and asking them to use AI to make their learning transparent is one of the ways to make your learning activities AI friendly, but also preventing cognitive erosion. The other step, the next step, is critique. Students analyze AI output or their own output by using AI also, and in that way they develop their critical thinking. The third step is iteration. Students improve work across multiple drafts. I always tell my students that use your beautiful brain first, and then whatever you want to do with AI, but then use AI to iterate, to maybe modify, to edit, and then but be transparent in that process, but then always loop back to the human. So it starts with human, goes to AI, and then close the loop with human again. So that's the human AI teaming paradigm loop. And for me, the most important part, actually, the most important step is the reflection. Metacognitive monitoring and reflection is very important in education. In my own teaching, that is the corner at the core of my teaching. I always ask, whichever pedagogy I teach or I approach in my teaching, I use reflection opportunities. I ask my students to describe how AI shaped or help their learning and where it cannot help. So they identify the areas where AI actually cannot help them. That is a good metacognitive reflection process. So we're going to be talking about this workbook, which will be also, you can scan the QR code. It will directly take you to my website. You can download on the free resources there. Or as Rhea mentioned at the beginning of the workshop, we will be sharing those resources with you as a zip folder. But if you want to go ahead and scan the workbook for educators, but I know some of you are not they're not necessarily educators, but they're interested in education or they want to pursue a career in education. So you can always use this workbook. So let me actually super quickly walk you through what the workbook is going to look like. Give me 1 second. No. Okay, so it's going to be, you probably don't see it.
Deniz, do you have the link to the QR codes?
Oh, yes.
We can
Yes. 1
just post them
second.
in the chat for some people.
Yes, 1 second. Okay, so you see my PDF? Yes. Yes, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. It's going to be, yes, someone, oh, Senay, thanks, Senay. Yes,
Is that the link that the QR code leads to, or is there a different
to
one?
you can search the free resources. Sorry, it's gonna be
Oh,
one.
I think they mean the workbook, Deniz. If you have a link to the workbook, or is it just on the website?
It's in the, so they can download it.
Oh, okay, it's on the
Yeah.
website.
Yes,
Okay.
you can download it, but yeah, thank you. But
Okay, Sid
again,
just shared a direct link. Thank you, Sid.
yes, thank you, Sid. Yeah, we can always we'll be sharing those, but if you want to just take a look right now, feel free to do so. So this is what it's gonna look like. Just like some information about me. If you want to keep in touch with me on LinkedIn, feel free to do so. We can always move the conversation to offline. So first, in the next activity, this is what we are going to do, and I created this in the Google form format, so we can actually, so you can type in, and I can take a look in a more organized way. This PDF is mostly for you to just use it for future references. But first, for any activity that you want to redesign, you just identify it. Describe the learning activity as specific as possible, your learning goals. And one place where AI actually can shortcut student thinking that can lead to cognitive erosion. The second step is identifying the risk. Okay, so you want to improve this learning, or you want to redesign or modify this learning activity. Okay, cool. But what is the actual risk actually? Because you can modify the assignment, but it can still be vulnerable to AI, vulnerable to cognitive erosion. So what is the actual risk that you can target? So what is the core thinking activity that this activity is supposed to develop? Where is it vulnerable to cognitive erosion? And the third, the step that I mentioned, the 4-step protocol, is redesigning it. So you can use this workbook. You can type it, print it out. So it's completely up to you, however you want to use it. But these are the first 3 steps. And the most important is the redesigning learning process, learning activity. Okay, so 4 steps. As we mentioned, the process, critique, iterate, and reflect. The first one is process, as I mentioned. How will students show how they got their answer? I call it making the learning process transparent, visible for themselves and for the educator or whoever is assessing their learning process. Instead of asking them, give me the answer, ask them, how did you come up with this answer? Tell me the step-by-step or your reasoning memo, or it's kind of an annotated draft, however is applicable to your own teaching. you can consider how you can actually integrate AI so that their learning process can be visible. The second step, as I mentioned, the critique. How will students critique AI or their own learning by using AI? Their evidence, their implicit assumptions, explicit assumptions, the arguments, the counter alternatives. This is more like promoting that critical thinking, wearing this critique hat so that they approach any output with that critical thinking mindset. Challenge weak reasoning, compare human answer with an AI answer. They can use or identifying cognitive biases or missing perspectives, missing perspectives in the context of, for example, the decision making. You can be creative as much as you can. And the third step is iterate. How will students revise, improve, or rethink their work across steps? So it's never the first draft or the first submission, of course, it's going to be the best, but why don't they use AI as a thinking body to iterate? But of course, as some of our presenters today mentioned, the first one is exactly the first prompt or the first input should come from their, as I call it, their beautiful brain, and then they use AI, as I mentioned, and then close the loop with the human, with themselves or with their teammates. And the fourth, as I mentioned, the most important one is the reflect. How will students reflect on their own learning, their thinking? Not everyone learns the same way. Maybe they identify different pain points, but AI can actually, AI is great at pattern recognition. And if students constantly shares their learning process to their AI buddy, then AI will start detecting the patterns. It may say something like, oh, it sounds like, or it looks like you keep making this mistake in understanding, I don't know, the p-value or t-test. So, and then as a reflection, students know it's not like the whole concept is actually missing in their understanding. It's like a specific targeted area that they need to focus on. So this reflection actually helps them focus on that. So if you want to, again, stay in touch, feel free to do so. But I will now go ahead and share the form. Basically, it shows all these steps in a more organized way, and you're going to be emailed exactly what your reflection. So if you want to build upon that, it'll be quick for you. Let me also, in the meantime, show you what we're going to be seeing. Okay, let me see that I was just testing this. Let me see. Okay. You're going to be typing your name, email, and actually, you're going to write your, of course, role. This is mostly for me to understand what's the majority of the participants. But here's what the actual activity starts. Some of them are required response. So anything that you want to learn, so you want to pick in your learning activities for your course, you can select, and some thinking activities. But let me tell you, I will say, you're going to identify the risk, and the rest of the question is tailored to your teaching. If your teaching requires reading and understanding, then answer this question. If your teaching requires reasoning and decision making, answer this question. So I categorize them differently because I didn't want to give you the whole list of things, so hopefully it will help you. Of course, feel free to answer all the questions, but for the sake of time, whichever is most applicable for your learning activity, you can go ahead and do it. So let's maybe aim for 9. I mean, of course, everyone is in a different time zone, but let's aim for like 10 minutes or so. If you need more time, we can give a few more minutes.
Okay, everyone, please go ahead. And I suggest, Deniz, you check the responses after 10 minutes, and if you want to give more time, there is 14 minutes left, so that can be extra 4 minutes. I can read out meanwhile some questions because we want to have time to go through them in the end.
Sure.
So let me just scroll up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So someone had an issue with the send me the free prompt library. It doesn't work. The link doesn't work.
Yeah.
It says something went wrong.
Um,
Sid, is this something that you helped with your link?
It should be the first MIT workshop. That is probably, I mean, it could be the technical glitch. I'll take a look and please try.
Okay. Is the link in the chat?
What's that?
Is the link to that in the chat already?
That is on my website in the free resources part. I think Sid is trying the other tools, but I may need to double check. But I tested before the workshop, the MIT workshop workbook is actually working, so you can take a look.
Okay. If anybody has any issues, again, we will be sending out a zip file with all the resources, so you can access everything. We'll make sure everything works then, of course. There's a comment from Kenneth and Anne as well. Anne, I will get to yours in a sec. Kenneth, how are these assignments assessed for quality of learning, and how do you assign a grade? And related to that, what does an A+ work looks like in reflection? What does failing look like? So it's just a question about grading or, assessment in general. Do you provide summative assessment, or is it just formative,
That's a very good question. Maybe in the next follow-up, or if anyone is interested, I will be happy to share the rubric. I do have a rubric, but for the sake of time, of course, because we're only given like 35 minutes, I didn't want to include that. But yes, I do. I take my rubric, or I design my rubric based on the available literature, all these research that has been done on metacognition, what a good metacognition looks like, what a good reflection looks like. If students show like a superficial thinking, they don't necessarily get the good grade or a good score for that. But it's usually the main purpose is to help them have a mental habit of thinking about their own thinking and use AI for the pain points or critiquing for the iterating and reflection and process. But if I see any superficial thinking, not deep understanding of like personalized thinking or personalized learning process, then I don't give them full grade. But I will be happy to share my rubric for different actually AI activities. And I can probably put on my website too, because it's something that my other faculty colleagues are asking too.
Thank you. So yeah, this is a huge topic, obviously, that we're all struggling with, right? We're all working on, and definitely warrants its own workshop. I want to get to Anne's question and also give my 2 cents on that. Anne is Satterback or Satterback. I'm sorry for maybe mispronouncing your last name. It seems to me that AI can do several of the steps that you, Deniz, noted, e.g. reflect, critique. Why wouldn't the students offload this as a form of cognitive erosion? So before I turn to you, Deniz, I would just like to say, and this relates to a point I made earlier, I think that point is correct for most assignments to a degree. Of course, we can sometimes tell or suspect that AI has answered something, but as we all know, the AI detectors aren't perfect either. Somebody apparently put the Bible or Shakespeare and got 90-something% AI, or I think, sorry, it was it was the Constitution, actually, the US Constitution. But in any case, I think this is a problem that, there is the notion of AI-proof assignments. And it seems like that's a difficult thing to do, to put it mildly. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Deniz, will be the sort of my last take on this. I think this is more about developing trust with the students and convincing them through work that it's worth it for them to not offload everything. And that's not an easy thing to do. But given that we can't, again, provide an oral examination of everything, and, to an extent, there was always cheating, right? But if you cheat, you don't actually learn much. So I think this is more about showing them the value of doing something like this. And I think when you engage students in reflection about their work, which they don't always do, they can begin to look at it differently. But of course, you could also try and AI proof your assignments. And Deniz actually, I mean, Deniz knows more about that than I do. I don't really do that so much. But please, Deniz, what's your take on this?
Oh yeah, thank you, Rhea. You nailed it. That's exactly like just developing trust, and it's a very valid concern. And yes, there's no limits that AI cannot answer for them. If they ask, write me the reflection as if da 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 da, they can always do that. Like for any metric that we introduce to any system, it doesn't have to be an education system. There is going to be a solution for gaming the system. So they're going to game the system. So, but if they know that I really don't care about of course I do care, but I don't care if they got the exact right answer. So like perfect answer. And I always remind my students that I care about your progress, your effort more than your perfection. Then they just want to show if they trust the system, then as Rhea mentioned, if they trust you, your pedagogical approach, if they trust the system that this is going to be helpful, then hopefully, if they're willing to do some work, then they're not going to be able to. They're not going to rely on offloading AI for those kind of metacognition prompts. But you're right. Like there's at this point with AI, there's not an end. But it's much better than asking them, give me the answer or write this essay.
I would also add that there is summative assessment and there are exams and there are grades in most courses. And that's where, if we don't give them access, to those tools, that's when it will actually be tested if there was a learning process or not. And we know that reflecting on the material that you've learned, connecting it with other things that you already know, results in more meaningful learning and can actually improve performance. So I think a lot of the trust is not just this is better for you in the long run, but this is actually better for your success in your degree, that you don't just offload everything. But it's the easy thing to do. We do it as well, right? We do cognitive offloading to our smartphones, to generative AI, whatever. And we sometimes have to learn ourselves that that's not a very good idea. And that jeopardizes our own progress. So I really think that the approach and the discourse, the discussion and the building of trust with the students is kind of the basis of the pyramid. It's before we get to, all the other stuff, because yes, otherwise, why not just copy from Wikipedia or copy from a classmate or whatever, as long as you don't get caught, right?
Yeah.
Get caught, that's the problem. But it's not never an easy answer for these things, I don't think, for sure. But yeah, the exam can be a place where the BS, is revealed if somebody has, in fact, just offloaded everything and didn't bother learning, right? Potentially. But again, that's not a real solution either, or a perfect solution.
Deniz and Rhea, if I may add, and like this is the $1 million question, so I would like to sort of suggest another approach, is that the reason like I was building these authentic problems is that we ask students things they own. So if make a decision, if they design something, like when we ask them a problem, give us an answer that like they are giving, they don't own that, they are giving us what we are asking. So if we could ask them things that they have ownership of, I think that is another way to like address this challenge we are facing.
Can you give an example of something that students might have ownership of, even from something that's familiar to you, Senay?
So in the design space, like if you have taught design, you give students 10 minutes, they design something, and you start asking questions, they will really attach to it. Like they really own it if you have it. So for example, it could be whatever topic you are teaching, design a simulation that shows like how you will analyze a bridge. So if they design something, I think they will build ownership around it. So it is not just something they are delivering an answer to, but they are putting something that they own. And I think the key is that promoting a healthy sense of ownership and in that process, learning should be happening.
And you also mentioned here in your chat, Senay, which I just saw, is about decisions. And Deniz also talked about that. It's like, why did you make those decisions? Right? Like explaining why and so on. Which again, coming back to Anne's point, yes, I can ask GPT to do that for me and pretend that I did it. But then I think that does come back to, firstly, that's easier to detect. But even then, again, because we can't prove necessarily that it was AI, that's difficult, right? We can be very confident that it was and still can't prove it. So the question is, do we resort to some degree of oral exams, for example? I don't think that's a terrible idea if it's very limited and very structured and very short. But for those 10 minutes that we're in the student, with that one student in the room, we make sure to ask those reflective, decision, justification, metacognitive, higher order thinking questions and see, hey, did you really put time and thought into this? Or did you just hand in assignments? Potentially, again, there's not something that I've done yet. So
I will say a couple solutions that I've heard that sound really brilliant is moving, instead of doing it in Word, going in through Google Docs, for example, where you can actually track the version history. And that's a really important way, an easy way to check for are you using AI or are you doing it yourself? Because if you get a huge amount of text in 5 minutes, it's probably AI. And so that's a really, really nice way. The other thing that I think is really interesting is I've found that the first 20 times I use any artificial intelligence program, I'm just blown away by its quality. And by the 50th time, I start to get a little disappointed. And I think part of getting students to accept that not to offload everything is to have them use it enough so that they find out that it's actually kind of boring because I keep getting the same type of thing no matter how I'm prompting it. And I'm not getting the full range of creativity that I might want. And so I think that's an important experience for students to have as well.
That's my experience with my first year students, with a lot of them that are very enthusiastic, and they begin to be a lot more discerning about what they're using it for, from what I've noticed.